Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. Today's solo flight special is being captained by Randy Wright. Ground traffic control has moved us to the departure lane, and we will be taking off shortly. Please return all seat backs to their original position, and ensure that all tray tables are stowed in the locked and upright position. Now fasten your seat belts. Kick back, relax, and enjoy the show as we soar above the friendly airwaves in comfort and style. Once again, we thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain speaking, and I would like to take this opportunity to personally welcome you to this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure and would like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. What's more, we are confident that no other radio program or venue will fly you over the friendly airwaves in as much comfort and style, nor leave you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment, quite like we can here at the Wright Flyer. Now that you're aboard, please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. We've taxied to the departure lane and are awaiting takeoff clearance from air traffic control. While they go through that mindless, bureaucratic red tape and regimentation, I'm going to go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist because there is a lot of news and information to get to before I may indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, here it is. We've got another round going with groups like Black Lives Matters, where they're going to protest again, where these so-called horrible police officers who are just doing their job are apparently engaged in racial profiling, proving once again that black lives don't matter. At least, that's the charges and allegations that are being put forth by these radical and sociopathic extremist left-wing organizations. So, what have we learned? Well, just recently, in Cleveland, Ohio, there are going to be no charges for a Cleveland police officer involved in the shooting death of a so-called 12-year-old Tamir Rice. So, what was this case about? Well, this happened about a year ago in Cleveland, and it took about a year of investigation, and furthermore, a Cleveland grand jury has declined to bring charges against either of two police officers who were alleged to have shot this 12-year-old to death back in November of 2014. Now, the facts behind this case are interesting. Needless to say, Rice, being a 12-year-old, was playing with a toy gun in a park. So already I can see how the extremist fringes of the left are going to try and say, look, we need to ban anything that looks like a firearm because it's just going to result in the immediate loss of life. Actually, if anything, this ought to come directly down on the parents because they are the ones who failed to both supervise this child and to teach him the proper way to react when authorities are trying to keep the community safe. It just makes sense that you wouldn't, in your right mind, point even a toy gun at a police officer unless you had reasonable suspicion to believe that you were about to wrongfully be put in jeopardy of loss of life or limb. I mean, that is simply the way that the grounds for self-defense work in this country. Again, I'm sure we're going to hear that this is more of the reason why we need to get rid of stand-your-ground defense laws. You know, what these people advocate is actually extremely bizarre. What they want is to go back to this tried and failed policy of you have to attempt to flee your attackers, and only when you have no other available recourse are you then allowed to engage in deadly force to ensure that your life is protected. It seems completely asinine that we have to go down that route to protect one of the most sacred of our fundamental and unalienable rights. Nevertheless, that is the way that the twisted mind of the radical and extreme fringes of the left work, not only in this country, but around the world. So, what do we know about this case even further? Well, we know the Cuyahoga County prosecutor, one Timothy J. McGinty, announced the grand jury decision on Monday afternoon. He added that he did not recommend that the grand jury bring charges and that he believes that both of the Cleveland police officers involved were reasonable in their belief that Rice had a real firearm. Now, this is going to not sit well with groups like Black Lives Matters, because they believe that the police are just proactively out there trying to assassinate blacks. I mean, that is literally the ludicrous position that they assume, and that is what they try and say. And of course, we've seen throughout this year, particularly in the summer months, that groups like Black Lives Matters want to say that it's racist if you claim that all lives matters. And how can we forget the tirade of just these awful shootings against police officers that have been engaged in by a targeted group? And what I mean by targeted group is that these groups have specifically been targeting police officers simply for the fact that they are wearing the uniform of a policeman, attempting to carry out their duty and to enforce the laws of the land. That is a terrible position to be placed in, and I understand that law enforcement can be a very thankless job in this country, particularly with this wave of the cancerous doctrine of political correctness just gripping this country at any given opportunity. So we see that law enforcement is put in between a rock and a hard place, and these groups will resort to violence, these groups being groups like Black Lives Matters, in order to push their radical and twisted social Marxist agenda. Of course, that has no place in a free and open society such as the United States of America. Nevertheless, the radical fringes of the left are going to double down on their rhetoric, irrespective of the truth. They're going to say that this was done due to some sort of institutionalized racism which runs rampant in the United States. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth, and this just shows that they are incapable of looking at things in an open and objective fashion. Rather, they are also just incapable of divorcing themselves from this twisted ideology because they are attempting to gain propagandistic points with the American public. I seem to think that this would work more with the younger generations, especially when we have seen that rash of so-called million student marches that have been running rampant in our institutions of higher education throughout this country. It is a huge debacle, and it has only served to further divide the American people. So what is it with these identity politics and this attempted balkanization of the United States? I mean, what goals are the radical and extreme fringes of the left attempting to accomplish here? Well, stated simply, I think what they are trying to accomplish here is a tactic or strategy, more tactic, though, of divide and conquer. It doesn't get strategic until you get into the higher auspices of this regime. We have known since the time of Eric Holder that the Department of Justice is becoming the Department of Just Us. They have this idea that hate crimes can only be committed by white people, and that there is this visceral hatred of minorities in this country by the white majority. Again, I'm going to say that nothing could be further from the truth, and that what they are espousing is a truly racist doctrine and ideology, which once again has no place in a modern and civilized society. What we see with the Obama regime and specific governmental actors within said regime is that they are attempting to roll the hands of time back. They're trying to go back to a time before the civil rights legislation and claim that race relations in the United States never improved. It's almost as though they're trying to say that slavery didn't come to an end in this country 150 years ago, and that we haven't made any progress since the 1950s with respect to race relations in this country. Yet, truth be told, I think that we've actually gone backwards with race relations. They're at an all-time low, a 40-year low, and it's all thanks to the perverse policy positions of the Obama regime. Everywhere you turn, there is this divisive, venomous language being used by groups such as Black Lives Matters in order to push forward their radical and twisted utopian socialist ideology. They want there to be this type of divisiveness just flowing through the United States so that we are all left worse off. And of course, they are the ones that are obsessed with race. You know, I didn't see race being a problem with the officers, like in the case of the Freddie Gray death, of it just being white officers going after black people. As you may recall, just recently, one of the officers that was recently charged with the death of Freddie Gray resulted in a mistrial because the jury could not agree. This was even the case after they pulled out a charge to have the jury deliberate even longer to try and get past this impasse. Of course, the jury was unable to because I believe that the facts are clear enough that the district attorney did not have enough evidence to move forward with these charges. And it's important to remember, with respect to our judicial and criminal justice system here in the United States, that a prosecutor is held to a higher standard. They actually have to have an objective belief that there is enough evidence to support a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. You know, folks, the reason that our judicial system, especially with respect to criminal cases, has such a high standard of evidentiary proof with criminal cases is because what you are attempting to do is deprive a citizen of his or her fundamental and unalienable rights, and due process calls for the fact that it needs to be shown beyond a reasonable doubt. That means that if there is any doubt whatsoever that is reasonable as to whether or not this person committed the act of which he or she is accused, then the case must not proceed. It's because we place such a high value on our fundamental and unalienable rights. That's what separates us from tyrannies, or, from these tyrannical and despotic regimes that have dictators who just proclaim the law. But that doesn't matter to groups like Black Lives Matters, to the race hustlers like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. But we have got to move past this in our country. We have got to remember that as per the natural law tenets that underpin our shared Constitution, and indeed the fundamental tenets contained within the four corners of our shared Constitution, that the law applies equally to us all. This is the doctrine that is known as equal protection under the law, and it is absolutely the cornerstone of our entire criminal justice system. Yet again, these organizations, like Black Lives Matters, the Rainbow Coalition, what have you, don't believe in that. They want to have a special niche cut out within the criminal justice system so that they receive special treatment because they feel that they need what has been deemed by the courts as positive discrimination. Now, folks, if there is ever an intellectually disingenuous approach taken to race relations within the United States, it is this so-called notion of positive discrimination. That is where the courts use a form of discrimination in order to supposedly correct some of the racial wrongs or discriminatory wrongs that occurred in the past, and therefore programs like affirmative action and various other forms of so-called positive discrimination have been viewed as legal. They view this as legal because it is a corrective behavior, or at least that is what the courts are claiming. However, I believe that it is intellectually disingenuous because any form of discrimination actually violates the natural law tenets and principles which underpin our entire United States Constitution. We shouldn't just take this lightly. because these are serious allegations, and the implications and ramifications of any such decisions, especially when you consider things like affirmative action or the other nefarious forms of positive discrimination, you're going to sow the seeds of divisiveness in this country. And we're already seeing that there is this huge backlash towards the balkanization that is occurring within the society of the United States of America. So, what we see here is that McGinty went on to state that the outcome of the grand jury deciding not to press charges will not cheer anyone, nor should it. He called the shooting a perfect storm of human error. So, Rice was fatally shot by Officer Tim Lohman, who was a rookie on the Cleveland police force back on November 22nd, 2014. And this was as the young boy played with a toy gun in a public park. The grand jury also reviewed the actions of Lohman's partner, Frank Garmbach. You know, folks, what we have to remember with respect to these police officers who are going about their beat, trying to instill a sense of order within society at large, is that it's a very thankless yet dangerous job. They put the uniform on and put their life and limb at risk each and every day. And yet we see that organizations like Black Lives Matters have actually gone out and said that it would be a good thing to kill a bunch of pigs. You know, I find that sort of language very distasteful. And you know, I'm also one of the first to come out and be against any type of law enforcement agency that attempts to encroach upon the fundamental and unalienable rights of the citizenry. Because, after all, as Jeremy and I have oft-times reiterated on past episodes of the Wright Flyer, the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this country are we the people. The entire impetus of our own protection falls on our shoulders. This could be seen in the Castle Rock Supreme Court case, where the majority held that, yes, it is the responsibility of the citizens to defend themselves, and that the police are not there to protect you. Rather, the police are there to uphold the order and enforcement of the laws of the land. So, we see that, yes, this was a tragic case. I'm sure that it was a mistake. And it's a horrific mistake. Nevertheless, the death of Tamir Rice, according to McGinty, who once again is the assistant district attorney, or the prosecutor in this case, was an absolute tragedy, but it was not, by the law that binds us, a crime. He then added that he informed Tamir's mother of the decision before announcing it publicly. He said it was a tough conversation. She was broken up. I understand that it was a tough conversation and that she would understandably be broken up about it. But what I don't understand is why this child was playing in a public park by himself with a toy gun. You know, at some point, responsibility does have to come back to parenting. And it's interesting to note that one of the fundamental and unalienable rights enjoyed by we the people is the ability to raise our children as we see fit. But with that is couched the duty and responsibility to be proactive guardians of the child and to ensure that we are raising the children in a proper fashion. Now, this is in no ways or means the same type of argument that is made by Madam Clinton when she came out and said that it takes a village to raise a child. No, this is just a reflection on what it means to be a responsible parent. Again, no one is charged with this responsibility other than the parent themselves. And this is why we need to take a serious look at the ultimate factors behind this case. If you jump to conclusions, as one might with the court of public opinion, and certainly as organizations such as Black Lives Matters attempts to in these kinds of cases, you're going to make erroneous conclusions. You're going to place the society at greater risk. You're going to promote the attack of police officers for no good reason. We have to ensure that there is proof beyond all reasonable doubt that these officers engaged in criminal behavior, and it is clear from what was said by the prosecutor and the determination made by this Cleveland, Ohio grand jury that there simply was a lack of evidence to prove this. What's more is each and every American citizen, including law enforcement officers, are endowed with a perception of innocence until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Again, we should not give up these fundamental pillars of our constitutional representative Republican form of government for political expedience. And that's exactly what organizations like Black Lives Matter would want us to do. That is their chartered mission. But ultimately, what their chartered mission is to spread and sow the seeds of dissent and discontent to further strain our society. So in so doing, that they can then fundamentally transform the United States of America and her people. And you know, this is the same type of agenda that we have seen espoused by the Barack Hussein Obama regime ever since he assumed the reins of political power back in January of 2009. Remember when his professor friend was arrested for attempting to break into his own home, he stated that the police acted stupidly. Well, was it acting stupidly when you saw a person trying to break into a home? It goes to say that most people would not attempt to break into their own home. What a reasonable and intelligent person ought to do in that type of situation is attempt to contact a locksmith or some other legal avenue in which to gain entry into their home, instead of bringing the light of suspicion upon themselves by engaging in conduct that your reasonable officer would conclude is violating the law. You know, when you have somebody trying to break into their house, what is the first conclusion you'd jump to if you were a passerby who didn't happen to know who this person was? You would think that that person was attempting to engage in burglary. And that's the logical conclusion that most sane and rational people would come to. Yet for organizations such as Black Lives Matter, this doesn't cross their mind. Or if it does, they are willfully blind to it because they want to double down on their extremist left-wing ideology and agenda. That is the dangerous strain of philosophy that we are facing in the United States of America right now, and it is actually making our society less safe. These people are pushing for the types of violent riots that we saw plague, places like Ferguson, Missouri, and various other places where race riots have broken out in both 2014 and 2015 in response to these alleged shootings of quote-unquote innocent black people. Now, I don't view this in a racial light. I view this in a common sense type of light. I don't care what race someone is. The law applies equally to everyone. That is why the old adage states that the United States of America is a nation of laws and not of men. In other words, the law is designed to apply to all of us in equal fashion. That is the natural law tenets that underpin our shared United States Constitution. Each and every one of us, irrespective of skin color, are endowed with certain unalienable and fundamental rights by our Creator. And what that ultimately means is that no legitimate government, without providing us with due process and proving us guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in our criminal justice system, can encroach upon, infringe, or abridge those fundamental and unalienable rights. We assume this position to ensure that those sacred rights are protected because that is the central cornerstone of our entire Republican form of government. Again, though, these organizations, such as Black Lives Matters, the Rainbow Coalition, all of the other various race hustlers that rush before the cameras of the salivating mainstream media, don't believe in that. They don't believe in it because they are wanting to push forward the propaganda of their radical and twisted ideology, irrespective of what the facts actually are. And here's an interesting point with respect to the Tamir Rice case. In a statement issued not long after the announcement, the family's attorneys renewed their calls for the Department of Justice to investigate the shooting, decrying McGinty's grand jury process. Why is it that they automatically assume that our justice system is not working as it was intended to? This is something that is a pattern with respect to their cases. And when you look at the facts, it's quite apparent that it's not quite as they are trying to say that it is. There is always some sort of mitigating factors that explains why the police acted in the manner in which they did. And again, we are asking our law enforcement agencies to apply a different standard to a certain segment of the population just because of the color of their skin. Now, of course, the nefarious and cynical members of the radical and extreme fringes of the left are going to say that there is no way that I, as a white individual, could possibly understand what's going on here, and that our justice system is, by its very nature, a racist organization. After all, it draws attention to what the president said, I believe it was about a year ago, when he said that racism is inherently within the DNA of the United States. In other words, we have this regime going out in front of the cameras of the salivating mainstream media and attempting to convince us all that the United States is inherently racist and that we will never be able to overcome our racism. But I think that this is a backwards position, the position of somebody who is doing whatever they can to adhere to some radical agenda that is by its own very nature racist in ideology and preference. We cannot afford to embrace such an ideology here in the United States of America. We have to overcome this and remember that the natural law tenets that underpin our shared United States Constitution and thereby our fundamental and unalienable rights is equally applicable across the board to all American citizens. Yet again, this is something that goes against the radical and twisted ideology of those radical and extreme fringes of the left, those utopian socialists who are working in tireless fashion to strip apart our shared United States Constitution. But as Jeremy and I have oftentimes reiterated on past episodes of the Wright Flyer, the greatest birthright that any people on the face of the planet has ever received is our shared Constitution. It is something that is inherent for all of us, whether we are natural-born or naturalized citizens of the United States of America, that these fundamental and unalienable rights apply, equally to us all, irrespective of our socioeconomic status, our race, or our gender. But these people don't believe that. And so we see from the statement from the family's attorneys, it says, "It has been clear for months now that Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Timothy McGinty was abusing and manipulating the grand jury process to orchestrate a vote against indictment. Even though video shows the police shooting Tamir in less than 1 second, Prosecutor McGinty hired so-called expert witnesses to try and exonerate the officers and tell the grand jury their conduct was reasonable and justified. It is unheard of and highly improper for a prosecutor to hire experts to try to exonerate the targets of a grand jury investigation." No, it's not. It's laughable that they would even make this claim, but they have eyewitness testimony all the time, in conjunction with video testimony. I believe that it was pushed forward in an objective fashion, because I think that the prosecutor was attempting to get at the truth. After all, that is what our criminal justice system is designed to do. Is it a flawed system? There is no question that our criminal justice system is inherently flawed. Nevertheless, it is the best criminal justice system that exists on the face of the planet, and we are the lucky benefactors to have such a system, because the most important thing that it can do is to ensure that our fundamental and unalienable rights are not erroneously encroached upon. That is the real risk and danger that is shared by all American citizens, irrespective of skin color or gender, or whether we are natural born or naturalized. But these people don't want to believe that, and I can understand why the mother would have these pains, and indeed the entire family would have these pains. But again, I have to ask the question, why was this child left to play in a public park, completely unsupervised, and running around with a toy gun? You know, it would be one thing if the parents were there, and after they explained the situation to the police officers shot the child. It would be another thing if the child had complied with instructions given and orders given by the police officers for him to drop his so-called weapon, and he refused to comply or even pointed it at the officers, and they shot him. You know, we just cannot jump to conclusions here. And yet, that's what the radical and extreme fringes of the left always do within these situations and circumstances. It's because, again, they are trying to push their radical and twisted ideology. And this is only going to divide the community even further. And it means that now there's going to be more threats by those groups that look to capitalize on these sorts of tragedies, such as Black Lives Matters, the Rainbow Coalition, all of them. They're going to go out and they're going to try and score political points with this. And it reminds me of what Obama said right after the Umpqua Community College shooting, when he said that matters like this should be politicized. No, they absolutely should not. This is a tragedy. No doubt in my mind that it is an absolute unmitigated tragedy. But there are factors behind this that just make it not a good case for this type of thing. And that being said, why is it the policy of this regime to always try and go and make a civil rights case out of this where none exists? That is the type of intellectually disingenuous policy and pandering that we have seen with this Obama administration that absolutely should not have any position or place in an open and free society like that of the United States of America. We have to absolutely overcome this type of problem because it is only making this country less safe. And on top of this, we see the regime continuing to double down on its efforts to attempt to deprive the ultimate wielders of sovereignty of this country, we the people, of our fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. In fact, Jeremy and I are going to, engage into a program this evening speaking directly on a proposed piece of legislation by a Rhode Island Democrat congressperson by the name of David Cicilline, which is H.R. 4269, which is designed to deprive the American citizens of their fundamental and unalienable rights. This is the sort of duplicitous engagements that we have seen with respect to the Barack Hussein Obama regime that really should make any and all decent, hardworking, red-blooded American citizens concerned. Because it is quite clear from the actions of people like the family attorneys of Tamir Rice, they're trying to incite violence. They're trying to go against their oath of office, and they are trying to strip decent, law-abiding citizens of their fundamental and unalienable rights. And it's funny, too, that this was also occurring, around the time that there are even more threats of protests occurring throughout the country. We now know that in Chicago, there were protests over the shootings of a black man by police officers, right, I believe it was about last year, and now he is embattled, and I really have no problem with him coming under this sort of scrutiny and attack, because he is one of the lead instigators in this sort of negative, divisive behavior that is occurring within this country. But what we do know is that there have been more pushes, ever increasing pushes, to have these sorts of protests that the likes of which we saw in the aftermath of Ferguson, Missouri, the likes of which we saw in Chicago, the likes of which we saw in New York, that are based off of a lie of, the phrase hands up, don't shoot. That was absolutely based on a lie that had no basis in reality whatsoever. Yet these radical and extremist left-wing ideologues are doubling down on the insightful language that they're using here, that insightful rhetoric designed to just divide and conquer the American people. They basically want it to be that there is no repercussions and that we don't hold a certain portion of the population accountable for their actions just because of the color of their skin. Now, maybe as a white person I can't understand this, but I have a feeling that I'm pretty good at understanding this, especially when I have gone up to bat for black defendants several times in my brief career as an attorney. And if I believe that the law enforcement agencies and officers are engaging in illicit conduct, I'm going to fight tooth and nail for my clients. But there is a limitation to this. We do have to remember that the United States is a nation of laws and not of men, and therefore we shouldn't just willy-nilly throw out our legal system or attempt to punish those who don the uniform every day to keep the communities in an orderly fashion. And that is the dangerous type of stuff and positions that we're seeing occur with respect to these nefarious groups like Black Lives Matters. And in fact, what we have coming out of Chicago now, at least according to CNN, which of course they are immediately suspect, is apparently there have been 2 more shooting deaths by Chicago police, which are prompting swift action by the city's mayor, as well as by residents who want the mayor to go. So apparently this latest upheaval came after Chicago police fatally shot Betty Jones, who is 55, and Quintonio Laguerre, 19, while answering a call about a domestic disturbance. Now, folks, what I can tell you right here and right now is that the police absolutely loathe and despise having to go out to these domestic disputes. It often involves a high risk of bodily harm, injury, and even death for the officers involved, because both parties are going to try and say that the police shouldn't be involved. Nevertheless, these people are usually disturbing the peace, and that is why it's usually happening with respect to that, and that's usually why the police are called into these types of cases. Nevertheless, we see that Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago, is now being fired upon by elements which are usually friendly to the radical and extreme fringes of the left, because there was earlier a case that really was questionable with respect to race relations. But again, I believe that we should let the wheels of justice turn as they are meant to. Otherwise, we are completely degrading and devaluing our criminal justice system here in the United States. So, Jones was a mother of 5 and shouldn't have been shot at all, police say. She was accidentally struck and tragically killed by an officer. And many question the shooting of Laguerre, who police say was combative. Laguerre's family said he suffered from a mental illness. CNN affiliate WLS had also reported this. Now, back on Sunday night, Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel ordered changes in how city police officers are trained to handle calls involving people who may have mental health problems. Again, how on earth were they to know that the person that was involved in this domestic dispute supposedly had mental health problems? You know, this is the danger that we run into with all of this mental health stuff that has been flying around, whether it's with the shooting stories or whatever stories you have. It's that it's impossible to know, and until they are adjudicated as such, depriving them of their rights would be difficult. And we know that in certain instances these people can be violent and dangerous. If he was combative and posed a threat to the life of the police officers, they were well within their right to respond with deadly force. Yet, that's the problem. We see that radical and extremist left-wing mayors like Rahm Emanuel, who was an integral part of Obama's 2008 campaign, they don't care. They want to put all of these overzealous regulations in place, and let me be the first to tell you, folks, if they continue to make this kind of push with all of the police departments throughout the country, they are eventually not going to have any police whatsoever, because the type of behavior that they are enforcing on officers is unrealistic. It is detached from reality, and it's merely going to expose these officers to greater danger. It's as I said at the very outset of this program, that being a law enforcement officer is pretty much a very thankless job in the United States, and these people are only going to make matters worse. Again, these failed policies of these utopian socialist radical extremists have no place in an open and honest society like that of the United States of America. We are a nation of laws, and we need to enforce the laws, not try and make all of these restrictive regulations that are going to drive decent people out of our law enforcement agencies. But once again, this is all part of that Cloward Piven type of mentality, where they want to overwhelm the systems of government as it stands now, and the limited application of our government, in order to make the people turn to these utopian socialists to radically and fundamentally transform the country. In fact, what they want to do is create this centralized collectivist mentality where we are all cared for by the government, and the government is the only one that can have a say in the day-to-day decisions of our lives. That is the dangerous reality that we are facing with these sorts of stories. And, you know, Mayor Emanuel went on to say that there are serious questions about yesterday's shootings that must be answered in full by the Independent Police Review Authority's investigation. And then he also said that while their investigation is underway, we must also make real changes within our police department today, and it is clear changes are needed to how officers respond to mental health crises. Now, the problem that I have with this is that it's automatically assuming guilt with respect to the officers before an investigation has commenced or even been concluded. After all, these shootings just occurred yesterday. That's not enough time for a full investigation that is objective to be carried out. But again, it just goes to show that whenever these wannabe potentates are facing serious challenge to their political positions, they will adopt these sorts of positions which are detrimental to the fundamental and unalienable rights of citizens everywhere. Again, this also explains why people like the president have gone out of their way to encroach upon and infringe the fundamental and unalienable rights of the people. They want it to be that you cannot question the authority of the government ever, and it's only okay to question the police when it's not their own. Now, in the case of Rahm Emanuel, I think he's being thrown under the bus by this administration. President Barack Hussein Obama has a long and colored history of throwing former allies and colleagues under the bus if it is politically expedient to do so. I mean, what sort of loyalty is that? In fact, the only thing I can say is that there is no loyalty with these utopian socialist and radical extremist left-wingers. So basically what we're seeing is Mayor Emanuel fight for his survival, especially after he had a contentious and close election cycle last year. And see, here it is. CNN actually states in this article that Emanuel, who is under fire for a series of fatal police shootings, directed the Chicago Police Department and the leaders of the Independent Police Review Authority to meet immediately to determine the deficiencies in the current training and determine what steps can be taken immediately to address them. Again, this is coloring the entire investigation. These sorts of things should only be brought up or addressed after the conclusion of the investigation. That is the way that a presumption of innocence is designed to work, and unfortunately, we're seeing that they are not going by that or abiding by that with respect to these shootings. So it's already placing a color of guilt on the officers involved, which I think taints their ability to have a fair and impartial trial should they be charged by a grand jury. Again, we haven't even had a chance for the grand jury to convene. Again, we haven't even had a chance to have the wheels of justice work as they are meant to. So basically, I see this as a form of obstruction of justice, trying to placate to these radical and extremist groups that are hardly better than terrorists, groups like Black Lives Matters, race hustlers such as the good Reverend Jesse Jackson and the good Reverend Al Sharpton. These are not the people that we should be bowing to or capitulating to, and their demands are unreal. Absolutely unreal. And once again, it just shows that these nefarious organizations are working as hard as they can to basically run back the hands of time to a different era. In other words, they're trying to say that any progress that we've made with respect to race relations in this country don't matter. They want to completely reverse it to where the majority is placed into second-class status or second-class citizenship. You know, the mistakes of Jim Crow are a stain on the history of this country. But why is it that we should bow and capitulate to these groups who are essentially trying to rehash Jim Crow in blackface? Now, that may come across as insulting or offensive, and in a way it's meant to. I'm doing this to clearly delineate the strategy that is being applied by these social misfits that are trying to excuse criminality in any and all forms. And whether or not this person was mentally ill or not, the officer's safety in this type of situation is paramount. And I see this dedicated pattern, especially from this regime, and the allies and proponents of the philosophies of the radical and extreme left to apply guilt first. Basically to state that these officers are guilty until proven innocent, and they can't be proven innocent. You know, in many of the interviews that have been conducted with these people, it's been stated time and again that they don't care whether they were guilty or not. That's all they want. They don't care what the facts say. That's not justice, folks. That's tyranny, and it's oppression, and it has no place in an open, honest, free society like the United States of America. This is why Jeremy and I say that this country is facing a constitutional crisis right now, because these nefarious groups like Black Lives Matters and all of the other various race hustlers are absolutely threatening the sanctity of the Constitution, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, is absolutely the supreme law of the land. We cannot simply bow down and kowtow to these extremists that are doing everything in their power to tear this country apart at the seams. Yet this is the repeated pattern that the salivating mainstream media continues to push as their radical and twisted agenda. Whatever happened to objective reporting of facts and the truth? Well, it has no place in the minds of these deviant leftists who are hell-bent on destroying this country and everything that is good and decent about it. But what we see again is that the extremist left-wing ideologues once again play in this deadly game of semantics, which I've mentioned going back to our pilot episode back on September 11th, 2015, to try and frame this in a way that best pushes forward their agenda. You know, Emmanuel said there's a crisis in this city. And that automatically places it in the type of language which, once again, colors the entire judicial process. You know, it absolutely raises the question of whether these police officers can ever get a fair shake at this. And I believe that the answer is an unequivocal no, because the court of public opinion has been tainted. Therefore, any potential jury pools have also been tainted, and they're not going to get a fair shake at justice. And as you know, we are all entitled to an impartial trial in front of a jury of our peers. That's found within the 5th and 6th Amendments of the United States Constitution. But again, people like Rahm Emanuel have no loyalty to our shared United States Constitution and the fundamental and unalienable rights that are endowed to us by our Creator. This can be seen by where the mayor was vacationing for his holiday. He was in Cuba, you know, the communist island just 90 miles south of the Florida border. So, once again, we see just exactly who it is that is in charge here, wielding the reins of political power, and we see that they are continuing to double down on their radical and extremist, as well as twisted, left-wing ideology and philosophy. But, you know, this claim of the mayor to go out and say that we need to immediately revisit police policies before even an investigation has been commenced is still maybe not enough to quell protesters Monday. Many who are incensed that the mayor has yet to return to Chicago from a holiday vacation in Cuba. And you know what's funny about this? This is the language within the article, then I think it's interesting that this comes up. They're not mad that he's actually vacationing in Cuba, they're just mad that he hasn't returned from said vacation yet. Once again, their prerogatives are completely out of whack and don't have any relation to the reality and concerns of most of the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this country, we the people. And we see once again another reverend, the Reverend Marshall Hatch, who is the pastor at New Mount Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Church, where Jones worshiped, told CNN on Monday that he suggested to the mayor that there be total and complete transparency if Emmanuel has hope of persuading some Chicagoans to trust the police. What exactly would this transparency, entail? It's one of those weasel words, one of those words which they play this twisted game of semantics with at all times. I'm sure you all recall that Barack Hussein Obama has come out on numerous occasions and stated that his regime is the most transparent presidential regime in American history, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. So what we're seeing is, once again, they are kowtowing to some of these radical and extremist fringes of the left. The Reverend went on to say that some of us may be interested in calling for his resignation if we thought he would. Hatch said, "I think he should come back to Chicago. There's a crisis in the city. I suggest that he gets back here." Okay. All right, so exactly what is that going to do? Is that going to get this kid's life brought back? Is that going to change the fact that he was shot or that there was a domestic dispute? What are the factors behind the domestic dispute? These are the sorts of things that an investigation should clear up. But we're rushing to judgment here, as we have with any of these racially charged cases. And once again, the radical and extreme fringes of the left in this country see this as some great opportunity to try and push forward their twisted utopian socialist agenda, irrespective of what the facts on the ground might actually entail. That is a dangerous proposition that we should not accept in this country, and we certainly should not adopt such a dangerous precedent, because it is only going to cause our criminal justice system to unravel that much further. Again, we need to be responsible, and we need to approach this in an objective fashion. And so all of this hand-wringing and emotionalism, tragic as this story may be, needs to be viewed in an unquestionably objective fashion. Because, at least what I'm seeing right now, there is nothing objective about what is being proposed, either by the mayor's office or by these pastors. Yes, I'm very, very saddened that this young man died. But we must absolutely know what the actual facts on the grounds are before we jump to conclusions and before we try these police officers in the court of public opinion. To do anything less would be a dereliction of duty. It would be a miscarriage of justice of the worst sort. But again, I don't think that matters to these radical acolytes of the extreme left. They want to push their twisted agenda irrespective of the deleterious and detrimental impact that it might have on the community at large. Again, they want there to be a separate code of justice to apply. And again, we shouldn't jump to conclusions when we don't know all of the facts that are on the ground. I know that it probably sounds as though I am being cold or heartless towards these people, when in fact I'm not. But I think that justice applies equally to all, and that we should give them the same amount of respect with conjunction to our criminal justice system as we would anyone else. Because if we erode that fundamental principle that the United States of America is a nation of laws, not of men, then we really will violate the natural law tenets that underpin our shared United States Constitution. And I think that would be a great travesty. I think that that would impose the worst miscarriage of justice that this country has ever seen in its illustrious history. We all need to take a step back and approach these things in an objective fashion. But the way I see it, folks, these people are hell-bent to not have that happen. They don't care what the truth might entail. They just want to pursue their radical and a twisted agenda irrespective of whatever harm or damage results directly therefrom. And you know, as I stated earlier, the Reverend Al Sharpton, according to the Washington Times, has already called for Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel to step down because of an alleged poor management of race and policing in his city since the release last month of a video showing a white Chicago police officer firing 16 shots into a black teenager and subsequent officer violence. Okay, I have to once again ask, what gives Al Sharpton any authority to make any sort of statement or judgment on any of this? Again, this is the radical and extreme left-wing agenda and ideology being pushed forward by the salivating mainstream media. They once again give attention to somebody who has no connection with the case, somebody who already has a rather checkered past with cases like the Tawana Riley case, or whatever her name was, that was also a false case. And it just goes to show that what we see here is that there is this sort of extremist race-baiting ideology that has been adopted by the salivating mainstream media, and that they're not going to give the police a fair shake. Once again, I couldn't care less what happens to Rahm Emanuel. Rahm Emanuel is completely and diametrically opposed to what any decent American citizen would support. He supported this awful regime that has done everything in its power to further strip decent American citizens of their fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms, as well as various other rights, and he has basically reigned over a city with some of the worst gun restrictions of all cities in the United States, and it has absolutely some of the worst rates of violence in the country. Again, these are the sorts of factors that you'll never see brought to the forefront or to the center of public attention by the acolytes of the salivating mainstream media. They are just going to double down on their radical and extremist left-wing agenda and ideology, which they simply seem unable or incapable of divorcing themselves from. You know, it hasn't been about objectively reporting the news for a long time now. They have just been pushing forward these sorts of stories and thereby empowering sycophants and sociopaths like Al Sharpton. And so he says, he being Sharpton, says once again on MSNBC, where he is also an anchor, "You talk about a crisis on steroids." No, Mr. Sharpton, I don't talk about it as a crisis on steroids. I talk about it as a crisis that is being basically thrown out of proportion by race hustlers and social deviants such as yourself. We need to allow the wheels of justice to turn as they need to. And that is the problem that we always have with respect to you acolytes of the radical and extreme left that want us to just bow down and accept any and all of these utopian socialist policies that you wish to thrust down our throat, irrespective of the detrimental harm that it will have on society at large. Is that really the sort of leadership that we need in this country? I believe that the answer is a clear and unequivocal no. But of course, we aren't going to hear that from the tenets of the radical and extreme left. They're just going to double down on this race-baiting ideology. They're going to try and create a problem that isn't there. Remember, just like how the president tried to twist the San Bernardino terrorist attacks into a gun control issue? You know, this is the type of disconnect that we face with these radical and extremist utopian socialists. And again, this is why we shouldn't just place our trust in the media. And that also explains why Jeremy and I go out, whenever we do, to provide you with the truth. But then again, don't just accept what I'm telling you here on face value. My goal is to empower you, and the way that I will empower you is for you to go in and look upon at these stories for yourselves, to come to your own conclusion, to make up your own mind. Think of how liberating that actually is, to finally hear that you are capable of thinking for yourself, that you can make these important decisions and determinations for yourself without any input from a third party. I'm just here to provide you with the tools necessary to get the first step going. And that is what I am dedicated to here. As Jeremy and I have oft-times repeated on past episodes of the Wright Flyer, the most significant and important service that we can render to you, our cherished listening passengers and audience, is to provide you the tools to empower yourself. You know, you need to have a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared Constitution, and thereby your fundamental and unalienable rights. And the only way that you can really do that is to engage in a little bit of research for yourself. And therefore, I'm just trying to point you in the right direction, to give you the information, to get the spark of curiosity ignited in your mind, thereby freeing you up to make the decisions that you need to, and to make the conclusions that make sense to you. After all, that is what the marketplace of ideas is all about. So, we see that these people are doubling down on their efforts to try and prevent justice from really going forth. And it's just staggering to see what they do, because what they are doing is trying to go against the well-established criminal justice system in this country, and I think that that is a great disservice to the officers that are involved in this case. And not just this case, in all of these types of cases. You know, as a prime example of the type of story I'm talking about, this comes out of The Smoking Gun, and it's entitled "Pistol Pulled During Penis Pump Beef. Suspect remains at large after Minnesota sex store incident." You know, this was published on December 28th. And it said that the Minnesota police are still searching for a man who pointed a pistol at an adult video store employee during a dispute over a malfunctioning penis pump. That's right, folks, you really can't make this kind of stuff up. And this is the sort of madness that our law enforcement officers have to face on a daily basis. And again, this is why I say that we should have such reservations with the earlier stories that I was talking about, because until all of the facts are known, we're not really sure what happened. And we have to have all of the facts and look at the totality of the circumstances before rendering such a decision that might, that might take away the fundamental and unalienable rights of the officers involved. And so, according to a police report, the suspect approached a clerk at Viva Video last Wednesday night and attempted to return a sexual device he had previously purchased at the St. Paul, Minnesota business. The customer claimed the item, which police identified as a penis pump, did not work as advertised. However, the store clerk declined the return request because the pump had been used, the police had noted. After being rebuffed by the employee, the suspect pulled out a black handgun and threatened the clerk, before fleeing from the business without a new penis pump, might I add. Officers noted that they had limited suspect information. A police spokesperson today said that no arrest has been made in connection with the penis pump incident, which investigators have classified as a felony aggravated assault with a firearm. So you see, folks, this is the sort of ludicrous thing that our police officers encounter on a daily basis. And of course, it gets worse. It gets absolutely worse. And we see that people like the good Reverend Al Sharpton are going to continue to go down this process of trying to label the police as acting in a truly nefarious fashion or illegal fashion without all the facts being present. Again, folks, this is why it is so important that we approach things in an objective fashion. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer, and I hope to see you the next time that Jeremy and I fly over the friendly airwaves, providing you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment, as we always do. And I also invite you to leave comments, either here on our YouTube page, our Facebook page, or our Google Plus page, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care, everyone, and Happy New Year from us here at the Wright Flyer. See you next time.